introduce Mr. Steele to you this afternoon.
Hold on, Bill, we got 2 more.
What? Got some more coming? Okay, we'll let them get in the door. Nice and cool in here today versus outside, for sure. So, Chris Steele was introduced to the Gunflint Trail by his grandfather Bob Campbell in 1961. That's 60-some years, that's a while back. Been his favorite place ever since. His resume includes nuclear submarines, a ticket for jaywalking in San Diego, Best Buy, a ticket for hitchhiking and time with a judge in St. Cloud. He said recidivism is a real thing. Lynn and Chris built a new cabin on the original property in 2000. In 2002, Lynn and Chris retired and spending most of their summers on Seagull since, winters in Tucson. 2 daughters, a son-in-law, and 3 adorable grandchildren live in the Twin Cities. If you ask him about submarines, he'll say, no, I can't tell you much about that. And he won't deny or confirm anything either. What he can tell you about are his early days on Seagull and the Blankenburg. So hang on for some good story.
Well, thanks for coming. Hopefully this will be accurate. There are people here who know more about Russell Blankenburg than I do, or think they do. But hopefully it'll be accurate, entertaining, and you can judge me on those 2 things. So we're going to talk about how did they get from there to here, and the theirs are Chicago, we'll touch on Duluth, and then where's the here, as noted. There are going to be tests. If you doze off, you might not do so well. It takes a village to raise a child and a whole bunch of people to put together a PowerPoint. I have an assistant, and I feel like I should send her flowers or something for all the work she did before I retired. I did PowerPoints. This is the first one I have ever prepared on my own. It shows. Bill Douglas and Jim Weenan, enormously helpful. Tremendous help. So thank you both, and to everybody else who pitched in. There are questions that I had, and probably questions that you had, and I don't have answers to them. So we don't know how wealthy Russell and Eve were, how much land they own, how many acres, don't know any of that stuff. So can't tell you.
He owned 125 different parcels of land.
Yeah.
Wow.
On the trail.
At least.
So there are some trivial mysteries in the first quiz. On their mailbox, Blankenburg was spelled with E-R-G, B-E-R-G, and everything else came to them B-U-R-G. Which is the correct spelling and why 2 different spellings? So bird with the U is the correct spelling, and pre-internet they were apparently concerned about fishing, like PH kind of fishing. I don't remember if it was Eve or Russell explained if they got mail with their name misspelled, they knew how the sender got their name and address. Quirky people. Okay, now Jim Weenan then lectured me. The lecture lasted about an hour and a half. Maybe a bit longer than that. How do you spell seagull? Is it 1 word or 2? So the DNR, that's the group that renamed Jap Lake, and I have feelings about that. They say it's 2 words. I say anybody who renames Jap Lake Olson shouldn't be listened to. Okay, quiz number 1. Seagulls are native to where? Come on.
There's several different species that exist on various coastlines, also on lakes. I'm sorry, I'm a biologist. Do you want me to keep going?
Can you catch? That's okay. So the correct answer, according to the Audubon Society, is there's no such bird as a seagull. There are gulls, and they are hard to distinguish. I don't know, I'm just being a parent. Okay, first serious question. How did people get to Grand Marais from Duluth? And I've wondered about that because the people on the trail in the early days got provisions somehow. Those must have come from Duluth to Grand Marais, but how did they get there? Who knows the answer? Okay, Renee.
On the America? On a boat.
The correct answer is a steamship. America was one of them, and it was pretty affordable. So this is a picture of the America. It's in 80-some feet of water near Isle Royal, hit a shoal, and sunk. So the cost, $1 to $13 a day's wages at the low end. At the average day's wage. Okay, so this is my disclaimer. My memories are old and imperfect. Yours are too. If I say something that's incorrect, who should we blame?
Jim Weenan.
Jim Weenan. So there's some things I'm not confident about. They're in red. Just because something isn't in red doesn't mean it's correct. This is the 11th slide, and we get to the agenda. What that means is Chik-Wauk will be bringing in breakfast during the Q&A.
What's on the menu?
Okay, so we're going to provide context about Russell's background, his business plan, some stories, and during breakfast Q&A. Why start with context? We're prisoners of our experiences, you, me, and certainly Russell, and to understand where he came from and what he lived through maybe will help us fully appreciate his considerable accomplishments. So, with context, there's 6 topics: family, gold, fortunes, roads. I'll spend more time on it, and then the other 2 things, communications, relay. His father, never once did I hear him speak of his father. He had one, but just don't know anything about him other than what's on the slide. And he died pretty early, and we're going to come back to that in a bit. His mother, he spoke of a few times, mostly in the context of, we did this, or I did this with my mother. And the quotes, she's more or less American, those are Russell's words. I don't know what that means. Now, I think Russell was born into a family of means. Doris had a cottage in the early 1900s, and that had to have been pretty uncommon. There wasn't a lot of wealth. According to Mr. Google or one of the AI tools, the median net worth in today's dollars is $30,000. So she had a summer cottage, suggests something. Russell had a sister. She was as invisible to me as his father. Never once did I hear her name. And then he had a brother. And I didn't know that either. And in the reading that I did, the only mention of Herman was in Russell's obit. And then down the street from where he grew up was Uncle Joe Cannon. Come to him a little bit of time. So why did he come north? And I think we can all answer the question for ourselves. One possibility is gold. So the Yukon Gold Rush It was probably still an exciting thing. People were looking for gold. Some gold was found. There were other signs of gold. And if you talk to Russell about where he'd been or where you'd been in the boundary waters in Quetico, he had been there. Now, I met Russell. He's an old man and I'm a 10-year-old. And so I can't, as a 10-year-old, I can't picture him as being capable of going everywhere. But he did. He I don't know if it was wanderlust or seeking minerals, but there was no place I ever mentioned to him that he hadn't been. And I don't know who all he prospected with. Roger Whiteside, a name that might be familiar, was one of his fellow explorers. So my guess is gold made a difference in Russell's thinking. There was other natural resource wealth. Today, the people who are making enormous fortunes, they're making them in technology. Back then, it was natural resources or the industry that supported those. So logging was a big deal. Why did Weyerhaeuser and Congdon and others clear cut northern Minnesota? From 1900 to 1940, the population grew 40%. Most people needed homes. Loggers did their duty. There was an awful lot of mining then and now. As it turns out, Bill Douglas's family had interests in the Cayuna Range, and that'd be an interesting story to hear someday. And the railroads and shipping were big deals. The names at the bottom, probably familiar to all of us, and these people were making money off of natural resources. And I would imagine Russell wanted a piece of the action. So to get to where the action was not easy. There were roads within cities, but not much beyond that. Eve reported that it was an 8-hour drive from Seagull to town. And that's in the summer. Russell made a trip to Cloquet and reported that was an 18-hour drive. ChatGPT says it was a 24-hour drive from Chicago to Duluth. That would have been a ton of fun. The road was bad. Corduroy means logs were placed perpendicular to the road in low spots. Suspensions on the cars couldn't have been great. Tires, not so terrific. Probably was a little rough. Now the question about how did people get from Duluth to Grand Marais came up when I was wondering about Highway 61. It's commissioned in 26, completed in 29, 4 years. Here, every third year, we get some repaving on the Gunflint Trail. They built a road in 4 years across all those rivers and streams and gullies. Seems impossible. And then, of course, there's the toll road that we're familiar with. It was a low water year when they put it in. Low water years, what happens? They're followed by different kinds of years. And it was regularly underwater. And Russell or Eve said it wasn't uncommon for fish to be swimming in the road. It would be nice for me. I can't catch them, so maybe in the world I could. So how bad were they? These are 2 stories from my grandfather and a friend of his. My grandfather was headed probably to Bearskin in probably a Model T on probably the North Shore. He had a plug of tobacco in his mouth, hit a bump. The plug of tobacco traveled from his mouth through his esophagus into his stomach. 3 things happened. He turned green, emptied the contents of his stomach, and he never again put chewing tobacco in his mouth. So a happy ending. Jack McPhail, a friend of my grandfather's since kindergarten, who also had property on the river, he came probably to Bearskin towing a trailer loaded with beer. Now, if you knew Jack, you know that beer was an important part of his day and night. And when he got to bearskin, the caps on the bottles had all exploded. And he had mostly empty bottles of beer. And my guess is it was flat. And Jack never again put beer in a trailer. So that's how bad the road was. Now, getting stuck is a common occurrence. What was Eve's job when Russell and Eve got stuck? We have two treats. What was Eve's job? Tony, what was Eve's job?
To push the vehicle.
Pretty close. Hank, can you catch? Okay. And what else did Eve have to do?
Get underneath the tires and stick some wood or...
Exactly. She had to shovel and stick wood under the tires.
Yeah.
So, nice. I don't know if you know the story or are a good guesser, but yeah. So Russell would drive and Eve would do the heavy lifting. If Lynn and I got stuck, I don't believe it would work the same way. So the cars were probably Model Ts. Now, all the stuff I read, cars were never described. So I'm guessing the Model T. We have a friend who collects them, an odd hobby. And so I asked, how fast can they go? And he said they can go 40 miles an hour, but you probably shouldn't. And that they, on good roads, you can maybe go 25 or 30. I don't think there were good roads here. Okay, so what was the horsepower of a Model T?
Looks like a hint.
Yeah, looks like a hint. Can't believe everything you read. 25? No. So the 25 is a picture I could snag off the internet, but what it illustrates is it would have been, Model Ts would have been allowed on sag. They had 20 horsepower engines. You can have a So not very big engines, and so if you ever talked to Russell, you would have heard about Twin Lakes and Lighthouse Lodge. He and his mother started a resort, Twin Lakes, near Racine. Now, in an interview with Russell, he described Racine as way up north in Wisconsin. So I looked at the map, and we have a map of Racine here, or a map of Wisconsin. Chicago is there, Racine is there. It does not fit my definition of way up north, but that's how, I had to Google it to find it.
Well, evidently, if you come from Chicago,
Yeah, evidently. So he and his mother bought a resort, added to it, and that was in 1920, and they renamed it Lighthouse Lodge. And there's the map. It's a whopping 70 miles. How did the guests get there? The guests came from Chicago. And what Russell said is in the early days it came by train, and then they were driven to the resort. And I'm guessing that the train went to Racine, but Russell wasn't specific. Later they drove. Eventually the customers gave notice that they were not going to return to the resort, and Russell went to Ely and then onto the Gunflint Trail to find out why. So how did Russell get to Ely? If it's a 24-hour drive from Chicago to Duluth, it's got to be daunting to get to Ely. And the answer from ChatGPT is train. But Russell never spoke to me about getting there, and as a 10-year-old, it's not the question that would occur to you. And if it did, you wouldn't ask it. Or
There were rail, because of the mines at Tower and Sudan, the railroads ran all the way up there. So it makes sense.
And Ely was the end of the rail line. Okay. Now, then the roads continue. There are different kinds of roads, and those are what we're familiar with here, the lakes and the portages. And pretty long distances. Now, I've shown it here, oops, there, and we'll see it, I think, in the next slide, is a big map of the boundary waters in Quantico. And you know, it's a long distance, a lot of water, a lot of portages, and things were a bit heavy. So, Old Town canoe, 85 pounds, tents, had, you know, I don't know what they had, but probably a wall tent, and REI's wall tents weigh 65 pounds. This is a tent I'm taking a backpacking trip in October. It's 2 pounds. So when you think of all those miles and all that gear, what kind of outfitting is available in Ely? Don't know. And then there's the mosquitoes and the rain, and it had to have been tough. Okay, and there's the map. So we have Ely, Basswood, Seagull, Gunflint, and Hungry Jack. A lot of water, a lot of miles. And then there were portages. Now, Russell talked about portages one time, or one way. So I'm guessing, so the first line, it's a guess, that there were few maintained portages. There were tramper trails. I think it was Cliff Waters talked about that. And between Seagull and Jap was the sole example. Cliff said he made some portages. Russell, the story I remember, he was guiding somebody. The forest was like broomsticks. The instructions were, you walk that way and we'll find the lake. And Russell said, I kept telling the guy we should be just about there. We should be just about there. And then the guy said, I see water. And what happened was they walked in a circle and they wound up back where they started. Well, I don't know what the destination was, and I don't know where they started, but just walking in a general direction didn't work. Now the portages were probably like they are in the far north, where it's not like a stroll down a sidewalk, and the Alpine Lake portage is an example of what I'm thinking of. There are 2 portages, 100 rods, 105 rods through the woods, like a sidewalk, couldn't be nicer. And then there's a 20-rod portage that goes along the river. Now the natives and the early people here would never, and I'm certain of it, would never have cut a long portage through the woods when they could go 20 rods along the river. And that's what you see in the far north. So this is Alpine, Seagull. I've been on this portage once, and this 105 rods is much nicer. But what portages existed probably were like that. Back to Russell, born in 1895. There's a depression that's as severe as the Great Depression. I'd never heard of it. It wasn't worldwide. It was in the U.S. a banking depression. People didn't make a whole lot of money. Today, the median income, household income is about 72. Back then, in today's dollars, 18K. No indoor plumbing, of course, no cars, no phones. Children lived in poverty, they weren't educated, and children and adults died young. Russell's father died when he was 17. Maybe that's the reason I never heard his name. Russell served in the war, operated the resort, and explored the heck out of this part of the world. Married Eve, and then the Great Depression, and died in 1983. Okay, so he's born in Danville, Illinois, and they lived there for until high school. His neighbor is the Speaker of the House in Russell County. I didn't grow up in that kind of neighborhood. And if I did, the Speaker of the House would have asked me to move. And Russell said he was presidential material, and Russell spent a lot of time in his yard. Russell got lost, nobody could find him, the police were looking, neighbors were looking. Russell was playing in Uncle Joe's yard. In high school, the family moves. That must have been quite a daunting thing in those days. I mean, most people today don't move 125 miles when they're growing up. Back then it must have been really common. So, oops. Russell wasn't much for boasting. He said he was quite able in baseball. And he liked baseball. And he also had this World War I, moving to the front, it got rather somber. And baseball was a big part of his early years. He had an offer to play ball. Now, I'm not a sports fan, don't follow any of them. Somebody who does maybe knows. He always talked about it as the Dodgers. Google says the Dodgers didn't exist until 1932, and that would have been after Russell's opportunity to play ball. So, I don't know. Anybody know? Doesn't matter. I'll bring it up now. It's later on, I think. Their house was like an explosion of paper. And that Russell could reach into this mound and pull out an offer letter and show it to me suggests that he had magic powers. All right, so Danville, Gary, Indiana, where they moved. I don't know where Gary was either. Apparently didn't study geography. So suburb of Chicago. Why did Russell turn down an opportunity to play professional ball? Okay, now think about Russell. What motivates Russell? Money. Why did he turn down the opportunity to play professional ball?
No money.
Didn't pay enough. Okay. So they didn't pay enough. 1920, his mother buys Whispering Pines. Customers speak about the Gunflint Trail. Now, how would you have heard of the Gunflint Trail if you were an industrialist or a wealthy person in Chicago? Don't know. Customers give notice, and Russell heads north. Russell wanted to buy 40 acres where he expected the Gunflint Trail to end. And he couldn't, so he bought the next 40 over. And Bruce, maybe you could tell me if I'm right or wrong. Somewhere I read initially Gunflint Lodge was named Gunflint Fishing Camp. Does that ring true?
I guess that probably was right in those days. Fishing was what it was all about.
Yeah, and that's who his customers were. So the Gunflint Trail eventually got extended. How? Political influence. Imagine that. It wouldn't happen today, would it? So because the Gunflint Trail, do you know the name Preuss? Okay, so they live on the north side of,
Right.
or they have property on the Canadian side of Gunflint.
Right.
Because they couldn't, Russell couldn't get the property where the Gunflint Trail was going to end or where it ended, he needed to cross 600 feet of property. So he got a verbal easement. We're going to come to that, a question about that in a minute. And then he possibly traveled to California, tried to buy property on Seagull, and then on Sag he builds a lighthouse, a monument. We'll come to that in a minute. Okay, question. What is a verbal easement for a Tootsie-Roll?
Worthless. Zero.
Are you an attorney? If so, leave now. So a verbal easement is nothing in real estate law. It has to be in writing. Russell recognized it as being meaningless, but it gave him, I suppose, an excuse or peace of mind. Okay, so the lighthouse that Russell built on Sag is where this one is today. The original burned in the Ham Lake fire. Who built the replacement?
Mr. Douglas.
Oops, sorry.
Seagull.
Yes.
Whatever was lost in the Ham Lake fire was not the original.
Oh, okay.
The
All right.
original had green on it. Yeah.
Okay.
Let Russell put it.
Okay, this is the third one then.
Put the next one up. The electrified.
All right. Now, always when I talked to Russell, he talked about I moved north or I made the decision with that sentiment. I don't know if that's true. Was it Doris? Was it Russell? My guess is it was Russell because he traveled here, he made the pitch to Doris, and they moved north. So what they had at Lighthouse Lodge was luxury. What they had on Gunflint was permanent. So they blew up their business model and moved north, which I think is remarkable that they can be successful. They would do that and be successful. So the Chinese curse, when you live an interesting life. Hit on the Model T before, the war, a pandemic, all sorts of cool technology. It's remote as beyond me. So sliced bread, canned beer, and mankind likes war. And he lived through a bunch of them. And there were some interesting people in these days. So I had a long list, and we could spend lots of time talking about them. But this is a picture of Dorothy Moulter. I had never seen a picture of her. Holy cow! So, but anyway, some cool people during the early part of Russell's life. And then there's Eve. Well, I've had trouble with some information about Eve, so I think she was born in 1908, but who the heck knows? Came up here, summer help, was living in Duluth, probably, or maybe Aurora, but came here. Corinne Michael, Seagull, the daughter of Hilma and Ole Bergstrom, Seagull described Eve as growing up very poor and being an incredibly hard worker. Went to teachers college and then married Russell. And how come I don't know when? Because I don't. Russell was alive during an important era. We have the Shipstead-Nolan Act, which Oberholzer was instrumental in. Oberholzer was one of the founding members of the Wilderness Society. Some years later, we have the BWCA Act, followed by the rather contentious BWCA-W Act. And Russell was on one side of that act, and I was on the other, so we didn't talk about it. Okay. What is the answer? Which of those three acts forever prevents the development of what we call the BWCA. The last one? Anybody else? Who said the last one? Can you catch? Can I throw? Barely.
I can't catch.
Anybody else? Bruce?
Well, it was the last one, for sure.
No, it's actually none of them. It's a trick question. But Bruce, you can have some candy. Okay, so all it takes is a new Congress to say, put a Walmart on Sag Landing. And nothing, so you can't bind Congress. Congress cannot pass a law that the future.
Yeah, wait, excuse me. If you designate something a national monument, it can never be developed as any other one.
We're not a national monument, are we?
No.
You cannot bind Congress. So,
They
November.
use the trick word forever.
The November 5th vote. So there's an awful lot of environmental legislation in this 40-year period, and some other cool stuff, you know, the rivers burning, Earth Day, all sorts of stuff. Don't know, the Age of Enlightenment is normally thought of as beginning in France, but maybe this was the environmental Age of Enlightenment. And who knew, Richard Nixon is considered the best friend of the environment of any president.
Yeah.
Hard to believe. So finally, I get to Seagull. I'm 10 years old. My grandfather has spent 5 years negotiating with Russell. Russell has to be talked into selling, which seems like an odd way to approach a business. My grandfather bought 5 acres, $12.50 a frontage foot, and as I say, the rest is history. Built a small cabin, he and his friends. Later got a little bit more property. And when he bought the property, the only people on the east side, east side of Seagull, were the Bergstroms. Seagull Lake Road down to where Jim Rammel and Deb Benedict lived didn't exist. The road to the blocks didn't exist. The Bergstroms were there. They're from Skokie, Illinois. Okay, so these photos don't reveal something, and then there's also deceitful. Okay, so Russell always, 100%, except for this photo apparently, had his top button buttoned. And Eve, in both of these photos, her shirts have buttons. Eve never had buttons. She had safety pins. So, I don't know, it's photoshopping. I suppose that's what this is. But the photos don't reveal that Eve had hands like a dairy farmer or a blacksmith's. So, when we have a heavy dew, our road washes out. So my first memory of Eve and Russell are they're fixing the road. Now I wish they were still alive so they'd fix it instead of Tuttle having to do it. And so they're fixing the road, and Russell is on a bulldozer, kind of like Eddie Albert in Green Acres. And Eve is on her hands and knees transplanting rocks into gullies, trying to grow something that won't grow. She failed. And she was an incredibly hard worker and expected everybody else to work as hard as she could. I don't know that people could. So Bruce has done the big reveal. Russell was all about land. He shopped for land in the Dakotas. He owned an orchard in Florida. And I'm going to circulate this now. It needs to wind up with Jim Weenan. I flagged some pages, and he wasn't dabbling in the orchard business, and the notes in the beginning shows that he approached it seriously. He had an option to buy the city of Grand Marais.
my God.
Now, an option is you give up something today, and later on you can give up more to acquire. So he put $300 down on the city of Grand Marais, and he described it as a rank bargain. Going to come back to that in a little bit. He bought from a whole bunch of different people. I got confused trying to follow all the names, so I mentioned two. Weyerhaeuser, well, I mentioned one, and I mentioned the other person, the heirs of a Civil War colonel and prospector. Seagull came from the Civil War guy's family, and I believe the Sag Peninsula came from Weyerhaeuser. He often spoke of how ignorant Weyerhaeuser was, that they priced lakeshore the same as non-lakeshore. And Russell bought what? Lakeshore, with some exceptions. And he also bought property on Basswood, which blows me away, which he later swapped for Fishhook Island and land on Mayhew. And then Fishhook Island got sold to the Plymouth Youth Camp or their parent. The bottom line, I don't know if it's true. Someone told me, my grandfather maybe, somebody else, that Seagull property was $1 a foot. And my grandfather paid $12.50. So nice ROI. Okay, why did Russell let the option on Grand Marais expire? We have dots or not Tootsie Roll. Anyone? Taxes. Yeah. He figured, and Russell spoke of this many times, he figured that the county would tax him into bankruptcy. And the county, Cook County's a poor county. Russell wanted it mined. Mining would make the county rich, but he figured they were going to try to get rich off of him, so he let the option expire. Okay. Now in the book that's circulating is his business plan. And jeez. Unusual vertical integration. So what's vertical integration? If you make cars and you also mine steel, mine coal to turn steel, turn iron into steel, make tires and all of the other stuff, from the beginning to the end, that's vertical integration. So take a look at this. He's going to have resorts, he's going to have mineral rights, timber and water power, so a dam, and a barber shop. Which leads to the obvious question, no candy for the answer. Bruce, why didn't you put in a barber shop at Gunflint?
We couldn't get our old barber to retire.
With Chuck's no longer in business in Grand Marais, there's an opportunity. And you don't have to know how to come here. Okay, so I highlighted the S, mineral rights, and so he's going to have more than one resort, and he's going to hold mineral rights. Now, if you have property that used to be owned by Russell, you do not have the mineral rights. Yeah, he kept the mineral rights, and I remember him saying, I don't remember the precise number, but 3 or 5 or 11 generations from now, some number from now, this mineral is going to be valuable. Very long term. But what a business plan. And it's in the book that's going around. And in the book is also a shopping list. Now, there are 9 items on the list. 5 of them are office items. So, you're gonna have resorts, and you're thinking about desks and typewriters. Do you see paddles on there? Anyway, shopping list. Now, he had a bunch of different businesses, and I thought if somebody came to me with these businesses on his resume, what are the chances of getting hired? And hired by me, the chance is 0. I look at this and say, the guy can't decide what he wants to be. Does he have ADD? I don't think Russell had ADD. He's just a big thinker. So he had the orchard, the resorts, the outfitting businesses, a toll road. So a lot going on. I think his primary business was buying and selling land, but I don't know. His attitude, I hit on this earlier, his attitude about selling was curious. Took 5 years for him to decide to sell to my grandfather. Maybe that says more about my grandfather than it says about Russell. A few years later, when Ken and Russ bought property, they had agreed on everything, and Russell kept selling. And Ken complained many times that Russell wouldn't stop talking about what they'd already agreed to. One of the Dayton heirs came up here and wanted to buy property, and Russell said, and I believe that this is an exact quote, "We don't want those kinds of people here." So what are those kinds of people? Rich Presbyterians. Now, I don't know. I wasn't smart enough to ask, why not? But we don't want those kinds of people here. They also had a bulldozer, something Lynn won't buy for me. And Kim Danielson wanted to buy the bulldozer, and they wouldn't sell it to him because they decided Kim doesn't need a bulldozer. I wonder if the Daytons wanted to buy a bulldozer. So maybe his primary business was not just buying and selling land. Maybe it was building resorts, or maybe it was the minerals and the equities. And why a toll room? And why the heck would you put a road through a swamp? So I have multiple answers to the first question. The good fishing on Seagull only lasted a few years. Customers wanted to go to Say. Hauling boats over the portage was rough on the boats. And if you knew Russell, he wouldn't approve of maltreatment of his boats. So give the customers what they want, customer service, and preserve the boats. Might be the reason. But more probably, he wanted to establish a business on Say, which he later did.
And what was the toll road today? Where is the toll road?
It's the dip.
The dip?
Yeah, the dip, yeah. And that dip, Eve said that in the 70s, when the county fixed the road, probably fixed it many times, it's the first time I remember, that they brought in 100,000 yards of fill. I find the number to be unbelievable, but who knows? It went through the swamp because the Forest Service wouldn't give them permission to put it on Forest Service land. Who were the resort's customers? In this question, the customers, that's Lighthouse Lodge, and initially on Gunflint, Seagull and Say. Wealthy business people from Chicago. And I think Russell described them as doctors and businessmen. He was asked, well, what about the Depression? His answer was, these people had money and they were looking to spend it, and Russell helped them out with that. Bob Einsweiler, who now deceased, had a cabin on Seagull. He described the sag fishermen as big meat fishermen. And I remember prior to the 78 BWCAW Act, is the road up the hill to beyond where the Debbie Marks driveway is, be loaded with boats and trailers, and the landing loaded with boats and trailers, big boats, big motors. So they wanted fish. Russell said they didn't need wall-to-wall carpets, and I don't know if that was Russell's judgment or something he heard from the customers. Eve cooked with a wood stove. They provided meals. Eve cooked with a wood stove. Cabins were built from black spruce. That was the best in Russell's judgment, and it cost $1 a day for hired hands. And he probably marketed word of mouth, but there was a visitors association that Russell was part of. Fishing was different from today, of course. The trout limit initially was 20 a day. And Russell said the fish looked like hungry wolves after a hard winter. They were lean and long. And he said there were too many fish and not enough bait. Talked about guiding. He guided somebody, I think, out of Gunflint, who ate enormous quantities of sugar, ran out of sugar, and then demanded they go back to Gunflint to get more. Russell couldn't believe someone could eat so much sugar. Turns out the guy was waiting for a letter from his girlfriend, and that's the reason they went back to Gunflint Lodge. It wasn't sugar. So, who did Russell admire? Eve, of course, and he talked about how she learned the business. And Russell also talked about Justine. He didn't call it marketing or branding. He said that Justine was good at drawing attention to herself. And then he said, it's not something I want, but she's very good at it. He also talked about Bruce and what he built and what a smart businessman he was. And also he admired their daughter, Donna. Donna's nickname was Bunny. I don't know if Donna's still alive. If she is, when you call her Bunny, she might rip out your tongue. So it wasn't a nickname she enjoyed. Donna was born in early 30s. Not a good relationship with Eve. And Corinne Michael explained that Donna never got to be a child. So that might explain the relationship. I believe one of the things Corinne said is she never got to go on the lake. Was homeschooled by Eve and then went to Duluth and started grade 3, but I don't know, was she 5 or 6 or was she grade 3 age? I don't know. And where did she live? Eventually, Eve's sister moved to Duluth. I don't know any more than that. Then went to high school in Faribault, Wellesley, and Payne, Weber, Jackson, and Curtis. Now, all of us, but especially the women, know about glass ceilings. Now think of the early 60s and how impenetrable that glass was. And how does Donna become an executive at Payne Weber? I was told by my grandfather that Russell put a pile of money into Payne Weber and broke the glass ceiling. So I'd say yay for Donna, yay for Russell, and money speaks. This is when Donna and the Penshorns have reached an agreement on the transfer of property. And Donna was easy to deal with until the agreement was reached in principle, and then it became a bit of a challenge. The yellow cabin is their southern cabin. It's where they wintered on Seagull, 50 feet from their other cabin on Seagull. And here it is. So I think they always had 2 residents at whatever resort they had, and then this. It's not very big, 12 by 16, 1 room, trundle bed, wood cook stove, of course, kitchen table loaded with papers. Didn't heat with electricity or cook with because it's too expensive. kind of pinched the tires. And took a tree or two to keep them warm, 3 or 2 per day. They got cardboard from Bruce. I don't know if your employees ever told you about that. And got sawdust from Kim Danielson and probably Headstrom's before Kim. Kim Danielson had a mill where Seagull Creek Fishing Camp is and had plenty of sawdust. Okay, so it could be a quiz, but I won't make it one. If you have a battery that is frozen like a block of ice, and you throw it in a wood-burning cook stove to warm it up, what temperature should you use? Well, I'm guessing maybe 350, kind of like baking a cake or making chicken. Sites, the Sites family had property on Seagull Lake Road. Jim Sites, one of the children, was up here. I was here at the time. Coldest winter I ever experienced. And the car wouldn't start, battery is like a block of ice. Walked over to Blankenburg's, asked for help. The answer was, bring us your battery. He did, and they put it in the cook stove. And Jim's not here, so it must have worked. And it might have been the same time or a different time, somebody had given them a deer. Well, this tiny cabin didn't have a freezer, or it did, and the freezer's under the trundle bed. And that's where they had the deer. If I wanted to put a dead deer under the bed, I'd be sleeping with the deer. So their big cabin, 50 or 100 feet from the little one, is big, but not in an absolute sense. Never finished. The basement isn't insulated. Why? Bruce wouldn't give them enough cardboard, I suppose. They don't have a slab, but they do have lots of black mold, and it's not salvageable. Burns in the hand like fire. The kitchen might have been the size of that storage room, might have been smaller than that. Very small kitchen. They had, Eve had a dorm refrigerator. So think of your microwave. It's the smallest dorm refrigerator you can buy. That's what she had. She'd have 15 pounds of stuff in something that would hold 10, and the door wouldn't shut. There's no, John Penshorn says I'm wrong. Could be. He could be wrong. Probably is. There's no exterior stairway in my memory to the basement. Eve had to go out the front door, around in front, and then enter the basement from ground level. And how I know that's what she did is whenever we visited, she got ice cream and cookies. Ice cream was better than the cookies. No indoor plumbing. Well, they had indoor plumbing. They never used it. I suppose it's like the electricity thing. I don't know. So the world got indoor plumbing. If you've been to Italy or Greece, Cyprus, you know this. Indoor plumbing goes back about 3,000 years. St. Paul had arrived in the 1920s, and Russell used an outhouse, as did Eve. The outhouse was another 100 feet from the big cabin. And he used the outhouse until he became bedridden. But they'd go to Duluth, and they didn't take an outhouse with them, so that would have been a shock. Early days, and Bruce, maybe you could tell me if I'm right. I remember mail service is 3 days a week on the trail in the 60s. Is that right? Okay, thank you. Federal law requires 6 days, but Cook County didn't get the memo. No phone service until Russell, other neighbors in the Forest Service put it in. 2-line system, one of those lines is dirt. And if you needed to call Grand Marais, you might have to have the call relayed. And then Justine would call Eve to say the mailman just left. And then Eve would go to the mailbox. I know that because I went with her one time. Well, some years later, I had 2 hernia surgeries, and I think it's all caused by going to the mailbox. They got annual reports from everybody.
Yeah.
And she gave me 2 hernias. All right. We used to visit them all the time. And we I never ventured beyond the kitchen until Russell was sick. The kitchen it's just chaos. Paper stacked as high as you can stack paper. And they'd have to clean her off chairs and set papers on the floor because every horizontal surface was loaded with papers, annual reports, and Wall Street journals. I lent him a finance book. I didn't get it back. He told me he lost it. So I think I could go to Bonnie and ask her for my father's book. They'd go to Duluth more often later, more frequently when they were older. Stayed with Eve's sister. Russell visited the brokerage firm and watched the ticker. Now they didn't have a TV. It was before you had the ticker on TV. And Russell, I remember him talking about, I bought, turns out, American Motors because you could see something was happening just by watching the ticker. He wasn't a day trader. I would guess it was uncommon for him to sell anything except for loss harvesting. Eve had a pile of money at Northwest Bank, now Wells Fargo, and she'd walk in dressed like she was dressed here, and they knew her and treated her as she deserved to be treated. There'd been a restaurant in Duluth that they always went to. They went on strike, then went out of business, and that's when the Blankenburgs discovered McDonald's. And they just couldn't believe it. And you got free coffee, free refills, and their hamburgers. No one's going to lecture me about this. The hamburgers had pickles. Pickles have selenium. And if I had as many pickles as Eve suggested, I would be ill. But selenium apparently is good for you. And they thought McDonald's was the greatest. Now, I made interesting decisions, we all do. And Arnie Olson tells the first tale that Russell and Eve went to see Donna, and they economized by sleeping in the car. And Arnie's old timer, long dead, lung cancer. If you saw what Arnie looked like when he was dying of lung cancer, you burned down the tobacco farms. But Arnie lived where Michael Valentini lives today. And anyway, Arnie said that these 2 people were at each other so much it was like 2 bobcats in a gunny sack, and it took a long time for them to get over the road trip. Now, I don't know what it was, late 60s maybe. The Seagull Lake road is in, and somebody's building a cabin. We're there in the winter, my grandfather, the Blankenburgs, and me. And Eve and Russell are ranting that these people are wasting so much money putting in insulation. What in God's name are they thinking? So they just didn't believe in it. Or those people didn't know about the Kerfoots and their company. They had a station wagon. The rear window on the station wagon wouldn't go down. With the window not going down, you couldn't open the back. To get into the station wagon part of the car, they refused to get it fixed. Someone told them, you don't want to burn up the heater, the fan motor for your car heater by ever running it faster than low speed. So they didn't. They would rather freeze than burn up the fan motor. But car engines, that's a different thing. Now, if you've ever been to Tucson, you've probably seen the Warthogs line, A10s, a very distinctive noise. Might be the reason I have hearing aids. And when they were warming their car engine, it sounded like an A10. So 1979, maybe 1980, Russell was getting his affairs in order, selling land, donating land, and the donation includes what my grandfather referred to as the gold mine, the sand pit that is on the opposite side of the Gunflint Trail from the Seagull Lake canister site. And Russell must have been smart enough to know that sand at the beach came from somewhere, paddled up the creek and stomped around and learned of that sand pit. So while Russell didn't buy back land, he did buy minerals of value, including sand. So he owned the sand pit. Don Enzenauer took some of that sand without permission, and I never saw Russell really move all that fast. But when I told him that Don Enzenauer was down there taking his sand, Russell sprinted. So I don't know if Russell was still healthy, probably was, just getting his affairs in order, and waiting for valuations and waiting for the IRS to agree. But I certainly didn't understand what was going on. Now the last time with Russell, and I don't know, was it April, March, sometime in the winter, early winter of '83. He's very sick, he's bedridden upstairs. First time I've been beyond the kitchen. Now he has a brain tumor, but when I saw him, you wouldn't know. He was alert and very aware. Said final goodbye, shook his hand, and he had a firm grip. And I commented about his tight grip, and his response, I've always been tight-fisted. I think it was a practice line. I bet I'm not the only one who heard it. And then Bruce was his Uber driver. Bruce took the ambulance from the fire hall, bypassed Grand Marais, and took Russell to Duluth, where he passed away in May of '83.
Somehow we forgot to tell Grand Marais that we brought him in because we were not authorized to go beyond that. When I got to Duluth, I didn't have the clue where the hell the emergency entrance was to the hospital. Around until I found that door.
People have often told me I don't have a clue, and they're right. Okay. So we're done. In breakfast, we serve soup.
Where was that picture taken?
Oh, I have no idea. Does anyone know where this picture might have been taken? Again, Eve has buttons, but Russell's shirt,
Buttons? Yeah.
as it should be.
Yeah.
And except for the buttons and not safety pins, this is, well, it might be cleaner than, the shirt's newer than when she normally wore. And people said that she wore Russell's hand-me-downs, and it could be true. Didn't matter. They weren't pretentious, that's for sure. And if we could be satisfied.
Do you know who cut his hair? His hair was always trimmed well. I know when we were.
Well, if Bruce had a barber shop, we'd know the answer. No, I don't know. It's a good question.
How much longer did Eve live?
18 years. I think it was 18 years.
Here?
Well, and then at the care center in Grand Marais. And Eve she was very good friends with Corinne Michael and artist David. In the winter, I don't know who she socialized with. Justine, probably. But I don't know. Any other questions? Thank you all very much. I had a good time.